And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Going for Two, presented by our dear friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host, Matt Brown. I'm the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter. I'm joined here by my colleague, Bryan Fischer, and it is a sunny day here in late January. Bryan, how you holding up these days?
Oh, sunny day in Chicago. That is
I know.
worth remarking upon. Yeah, no, doing well. Fun weekend of NFL football. Had a lot of soccer action as well. So rested up a little bit after getting back from the NCAA convention, taking a little. I think I took about 12 hours off where I just did not do any kind of work whatsoever.
Good.
It was nice and lovely. The kids are running around. So yeah, it's been it was a productive weekend for sure.
I'm glad to hear that. We all need to do that more often. Like I had a small surgery on Thursday, and like the doctor's orders were like, you have to lie down for like 3 days. Like, don't run around with your kids, don't go exercise, like just literally stay on the couch. And I thought that would be a blessing because deep down that's all I really want to do. But it wasn't until a doctor told me I couldn't do it that I'm like, no, now I do want to get up. Now I do want to participate in things because like that's fun for like 2 hours, but the rest of the world doesn't listen to you, even if what you want to do is nothing. Even though we may want to do a little bit less, there's still other stuff happening. And there were, I think, a couple of things that maybe we either missed because of convention or haven't had a chance to fully digest it. I do want to talk to you about that fit right in the Going for Two wheelhouse. I wrote about one of these bills last week, and judging from my analytics, not very many of you people got a chance to see it yet because I understand that this isn't the thing that people want to talk about. This year is going to be a year where the NCAA's battle or ability to kind of win relationships with the federal level is going to be a major storyline. We are going to talk about those conversations a lot on this show and a lot across D1 Ticker. But those aren't the only legislative conversations happening. Over the last year and a half, a major battlefield for college sports was at the state house level, everybody writing their own NIL bills and tweaking things and trying to get an advantage over each other. And there seems to be maybe some movement that could be happening again. If you missed this before, last week, a California Assembly member, Chris Holden, who's a Democrat from the Pasadena area, called a press conference to announce a bill that he is proposing called the College Athlete Protection Act, or in the staid language of Extra Points, we'll call it that Assembly Bill 252. California, as you may recall, was the first state to get moving on an NIL bill. And it's interesting, like that NIL bill in California ended up not being nearly the most expansive. Florida got theirs done and kind of moved things along a little bit faster, and other states kind of moved on from there. But California was the first to really kind of push that envelope and extend that conversation. There are lawmakers and activists that are hoping that California could do the same for other aspects here. This bill, in short, if I'm understanding it correctly, is going to require every Division I institution in the state, whether you're public or private, to establish something called a degree completion fund, which basically means you have to split some of your revenue above a certain point with your athletes, depending on the revenue that each particular sport graduates. And there's a formula laid out in the bill, and a couple other outlets did some math. And that would mean that, if this is passed exactly as it looks right now, California public school, the big P5 schools in California would need to be paying out to football and men's basketball players over $150,000 a year, in some cases closer to $3 million, and then paying limited stipends to women's basketball players and potentially even gymnasts from that top line revenue. I wrote a lot about this here, and I'm happy. I read the whole bill. I read all the other coverages here, and I have a couple of thoughts, but I was curious what you thought about this. Independent of whether athletes should be paid or whatnot, what did you think about this bill and the kind of surrounding press conferences and everything around it?
Well, kind of what you alluded to. It's not necessarily this bill or the text of this bill that I think is interesting. It's kind of like, what are those second order effects, that come out of this? Are other states going to copy it? There's going to be, certainly a national legislation push that we've talked about quite a bit here on Going for Two and a lot of other platforms in terms of, does this kind of prompt Congress to take a look at things and maybe speed up their thinking about potential, exceptions? But as far as the bill itself, It was interesting, I guess. I guess notable in terms of the timing. It was a big rollout there in front of the Rose Bowl, as you mentioned. But to be honest, I thought it's kind of filled with a few exceptions that probably put a dent in terms of how much actual bite it has in terms of the law. I mean, I would question a little bit things like there's a $25,000 per year cap for people that are actually in school. Like why is
Yeah.
that $25,000? Why is there a cap? At all? Why are schools just paying this out? But I think it does speak to number one, really how much the revenues in those big time sports. I think that is kind of the next frontier that not only the schools are looking at potentially coming under siege, but certainly the lawmakers are, and this might be kind of the start of that that front for sure. I think we've looked at name, image, and likeness. There's still some stuff going on that front, but this is really where the big time revenues, the ones that really are kind of funding not just the athletic departments, but really a lot of those Olympic sports as well. That's the kind of the next frontier in terms of this battle between employees, non-employees, schools, non-schools, private, public, all that sort of kind of thrown into one bucket. That's the biggest slice of the pie, and I think that might pique a lot more interest for a lot of folks moving forward.
It's not an accident that they want to, they being, this particular assembly person and many of the activists that are pushing for this. I don't think it's an accident that's happening in California. It's happening right now because California institutions in particular, and specifically USC and UCLA, are about to earn a lot of new revenue, not just from joining the Big Ten and being a part of their next television contract, but also with the expansion of the college football playoff. Both of those things set to happen in 2024. If you get this done early, those athletes might be in a position to immediately take advantage of that financial windfall in a way that they might not otherwise if we did this year or a couple of years in the future. I will say, having gotten in the weeds and read the whole 30-something page bill, I'm not very impressed, even though I am sympathetic to what they're trying to do. Yes, if you are a high-level football player at USC, in my estimation, the most honest thing to do is for the school to pay you. The school is driving the value from you. The school has control over you. The school does a lot of things that are aligned with employment, something that this bill curiously does not take a position on. I would rather USC cut that check rather than Boulevard or Will Ferrell or somebody else. Part of the reason, though, that I'm unimpressed with this, and it does speak to what's going to be a challenge for anybody to pay athletes, is this idea of how are we doing the accounting? Who's checking the math? What is, what constitutes excess revenue? It's really difficult to look at the EADA data, which goes to the Department of Education, or these FRS reports, which go to the NCAA, and read them like a bank statement and say, you took in this much revenue, these were your expenses, ergo this is your profit. Because they're, right now everyone's operating a nonprofit system accounting. And a lot of the both revenues and expenses you see on those reports are not real, in the sense that they're not like somebody cutting a check to a third party or someone writing a check to you. A lot of it is paper transactions across different departments. So if you just use this data, it is extremely easy. And this is not just my opinion. This is from talking to like CPAs. It's very easy for any department to say, magically my basketball program didn't make any money. Or magically we're showing a $9 million surplus, depending on how you calculate scholarships and what expenses go to central campus and which ones go elsewhere. So I think, absent anything else, what you would see is some extremely creative accounting from every single California public school to make sure that people are paying as little of this money as possible. And I'm like, well, we established this new commission to regulate that stuff. Like, if that commission is not 21 lawyers or accountants that know this industry really well, it's not going to work. And this is the challenge with regulating any industry, when the industry people are 3 steps ahead of the actual regulators. And I don't know the answer to that either, but like, that's a big issue.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. And just in general, and not even talking about this bill, I mean, I think creative accounting is something that is not only practiced well in the sports world, but practiced well, especially in college athletics. I mean, how many times do you see, magically one, a school or department, especially on those FRS reports, ends up, breaking even or has, $100,000 surplus or something like that. It kind of strains certainly the credibility of a lot of this accounting. And, some of it is, you send some school money back to the school sends you some money, you get creative in a lot of ways. And I think that is an ultimate truth. And along with those billable hours that college athletics always loves, creative accounting is also kind of part of this. And this is not just necessarily limited to the necessarily the college athletic world. I mean, this applies in general in the sports world. You look over at Serie A right now, a big scandal going on there in terms of the accounting practices of Juventus and a couple of other clubs that is kind of taking that soccer world by storm right now with some sanctions and all that. So there's this stuff kind of happens a lot, and it's not just limited to college athletics. And so that was the biggest hole certainly in the bill when I was going through it. Was like, all right, well, I know somebody's going to get even more creative. Magically there's going to be some forward maintenance costs that are being accounted for in certain programs, that or deferred payments end up getting pushed forward or something like that. That creativeness in terms of the accounting is probably something that we could explore a little bit further, maybe on an episode later this spring or the summer. But it is a fact of life, and should this get kind of pushed through, which was also the interesting thing is, look, this district I don't believe has a Division I program in that congressman's district. And I think when you look at the NCAA kind of being a little bit more offensive in terms of their messaging and what they want to say, it's going to be interesting too, kind of seeing what USC, UCLA, some of these other schools, and not even just the major ones, your Cal State Northridges, your Stanfords, your Cals, others might get involved in terms of pushing their own local congressmen, say, we don't want this bill. Are you going to be representing our district in our interest, and say, hey, we need to push this back and push this out of kind of the process, because that to me is going to be an interesting thing to see. Is this going to be a test case in particular for some of the schools kind of fighting back a little bit harder against some of these regulations and some of these bills and proposals?
I mean, that is exactly what happened in California last year. Like, this isn't the first time someone's proposed one of these. The university, the UC and the CSU system pushed back very aggressively. And that was part of why the bill died in the Appropriations Committee. And so now I think it's worth noting that this gentleman is, I believe, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and also a former Division I basketball player, played at San Diego State. So presumably that would help kind of usher this along. But without question, that's part of why a lot of the federal NIL legislation died, because universities were lobbying their home state senators a lot about why we don't want this, or we don't want it to look a certain way. And that will be a part of this here too. However, you don't necessarily need to pass a bill for it to be effective at some other things. You don't need to be a political science major to understand, I think, the concept of a signaling bill, where you propose something and you get a news cycle out of it, and you get this into the earworm of your colleagues in the State House to maybe change the Overton window about what might be acceptable things to ask for in this kind of debate, or to maybe apply pressure on some other stakeholder. So that, I think, that is part of the genius of what worked really well with California's NIL pitch beforehand. Was even it was originally signed and everything, it wouldn't have gone into effect for a couple of years. And
I don't even think it would have. The original date probably would have been. I think it was next year, actually.
Yeah,
so we still would have had time.
It wouldn't even been a thing, but that changed lawmaker attention in several other states, and eventually, I think it was particularly crucial that Florida was one of the early adopters, where then Republicans were the ones that really kind of took up that mantle and changed everything and kept this from being a crazy left-wing California political issue to, we need to do this in part to help the our teams in the SEC and the ACC. And then that became a national thing. If theoretically somebody in, say, Florida or North Carolina or Texas carried this banner too, I think that changes the dynamic of this issue in state houses and in the federal government very significantly. If the other states that do this are Connecticut, Washington, and like Maine, less so, still potentially noteworthy. What impact this exact proposal will have in Congress, I don't know yet. I called a couple of congressmen late last week. It's on my agenda to call a few more this week. I'm trying to get a cross section of both Republicans and Democrats from different kinds of districts in the House to hear what they're thinking about this, because my read is most of them haven't thought about it. That's what a few congressional staffers have told me. They're like, "You're asking about what? That's not Ukraine." Like, yeah, I know, but that's what people pay me to ask. So, we'll share that. It's not the only kind of messaging bill that's happening at the state level. I also wanted to note, while all of this is happening to maybe push college sports in a much more expansive direction, we also have a state that is moving, that is trying to go maybe the opposite direction. There is an NIL bill in the state of Oklahoma, one of the most reliably Republican and conservative states in the country. This is from On3's reporting. One of their Oklahoma State senators, who is the majority leader in the chamber, has proposed a revision to their NIL bill, one, to allow schools to be much more involved in that process, which is the direction most southeastern states are going. If you're moving into the SEC, you want to probably move into to be lined up with your peer states, but also to specifically mention that college athletes in Oklahoma would not be considered employees. I believe this is the third state that actually has that in there. I don't think it's an accident that Oklahoma is trying to put that in. I would not be shocked if more right-leaning states that still have NIL laws on the books or considering revisions to those laws consider putting that in there. Now, can Oklahoma State Senate prevent Oklahoma athletes from being deemed employees if the federal court system or Congress or the NLRB says that they are? No. Like, it's not your choice. That's not something that's up to state capitals. But people do this all the time to show how, what that constituency feels about that issue. I bet if you were a U.S. House member in Oklahoma, as if there was any doubt how your constituents feel about college athletes and organized labor, perhaps this is another signaling device to let you know how you should be voting.
Yeah, and I think again, who else is going to copy this? Who else is going to continue to keep pushing these boundaries? You can go even further than what this bill even is proposing, and it's going to be interesting too in terms of again, does this kind of start getting things going in the actual Congress, in the U.S. Congress, to say, you know what? Maybe because all of these states are doing this all at the same time, maybe it does take a little bit more to where we got to get it in this session, or we got to get it done by this summer in terms of potential bill. This is something that Linda Livingstone, the Baylor president, has spoken about. Certainly Charlie Baker, the new NCAA president, they're going to have to all address in terms of everything that they are going to be doing and addressing with the leaders in Washington. But this whole thing about labor and college athletics and all that. Number one, it not only is it an uncertain area, but there's a lot to explore here, and I think that's why something is ultimately going to happen, at some point on some front in 2023. But also that this is going to be a very complicated issue, and how it's going to play out not only this year but moving forward. I think it's going to be something that is certainly in flux, and you're going to see a lot more of these type of bills pop up in various state houses. I can imagine certainly North Carolina, maybe a Florida, somebody like that ends up putting something in similar. And I think it just kind of speaks to how haphazard everything is, and really that's the biggest challenge that Charlie Baker is going to have is making sure that the message is consistent, whether you're against Oklahoma or the California bill, in terms of, hey, this is why we need to do this, and we need to do this now.
Yeah, I can speak to this, but before we kind of wrap this up, I know what the timing is here to get a bipartisan college sports bill done. It is going to be incumbent upon the NCAA and lawmakers to move very quickly. This is not something that realistically can really stretch until late next year, in part because next year is a presidential cycle, which means that typically the last 6 months of that session, there's not going to be any lawmaking done. You generally have a shorter window in those kind of cycles to get any kind of bipartisan activity. And also, major court cases and the NLRB are going to start. I mean, they're going to start hearings relatively soon. By 2024, you may run out of time. It's entirely possible that the appeals process for Johnson will be exhausted by 2024. We will likely have close to a final NLRB ruling by 2024. The House case will begin to. We're going to see pretrial, filings this year. Like, I believe that trial starts. And it's the House case, in case you didn't know, this is for athletes who are suing the NCAA over damages for when they were denied access to their NIL rights. And now that it's allowed, they want back pay. All of those things could independently be very significant. All three of them is a death blow. You need the federal government, you need the legislative arm to do something before that stuff happens, or else it's already doomsday. So I realistically, I think that the window here is you got 8 months, practically speaking, because Congress isn't in session the entire time otherwise. And to get everybody on the same page to make this happen, 8, maybe 9 months. And we'll see what happens at the state house level too. One thing that I know is much easier to do than get some kind of complicated bipartisan legislation passed, something that touches antitrust law, intellectual property law, labor law, people's emotional babies, all these other things. That's very difficult. One thing is much easier is buying cool stuff on homefieldapparel.com. If you listen through a 20-minute segment about antitrust law and state house legislating, you deserve to treat yourself. And one way you can do that is through an exceptionally comfortable shirt, a hoodie, tank top, or sweatpants from our friends at Home Field Apparel, who make some of the most comfortable, officially licensed collegiate apparel with unique vintage designs. This is an especially good week. We are recording this here a little bit earlier to get on this because they are dropping some special limited editions. You need to make sure that you are on their email listserv. I mean, you should be for Extra Points, but you should definitely be on the Home Field one as well. If you're interested in any of this, as we are recording, they have a special drop for UConn. I am a big fan of the UConn Doggers. They are the most comfortable pants that I've worn as I've been on the couch a lot these past couple of days. Those have been what I'm wearing, but they have some absolutely outstanding long sleeve shirts here with the baby husky in front of the state of Connecticut. You've got the husky with the gun. You've got the dog that's with the paws outstretched and everything sticker. You should buy all of those things. You should not. I mean, if you're not a UConn, if you're a Syracuse fan or something, I'm sure there's something there for you, or a UMass fan. But if you're
well, there is a special drop for Syracuse coming out.
There is. So other people that don't like UConn can also have things available for them too. And I'm also continuously told that other mid-majors and other 1 AAA schools, potentially some Division II schools, are coming soon as well. There was a bit of a backlog, I think, during football season for launching some of those. As we get closer to the end of the NCAA tournaments, naturally, those things will be available. So go to homefieldapparel.com, make sure that you're signed up to the listserv, and then buy something. And when you do, use promo code Extra Points, all one word, if you haven't done it yet, and save 15% off your first order. That first order could also include an Extra Point shirt. They still got a couple of those left in most sizes with our wonderful Bagman logo. That is that is homefieldapparel.com. Promo code Extra Points. It's pretty easy to drop a bag with Home Field. It's pretty easy to drop a bag when you're buying most things online. But Brian, I think one thing that we've learned over the past week and a half, 2 weeks or so, is that sometimes it can be a little bit complicated to spend a lot of money in the college sports world. There's been an NIL story that I know I've been paying a lot of extra attention to, and I think it's been on your radar as well. That really kind of demonstrates, for all of the improvements of this system compared to where we were a few years ago, it is also still deeply, deeply stupid. You know the one I'm talking about, right?
I believe you're referring to the Jaden Rashada saga. Is that the appropriate term that we can use?
Yes. I can do this if you'd like, but would you like to maybe give the people who are not recruitniks a very quick synopsis of where we are right now in this story, and then maybe we can get into the weeds in there a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, 4 or 5-star recruit, depending on who you talk about. Quarterback outside from the West Coast, actually, kind of got into a bit of a recruiting battle from between Miami and Florida, which obviously there was a lot of people saying, all right, he was eventually going to go to Miami. That was going to be the thing. Then he ends up surprising some folks, ended up signing with Florida. He signed his national letter of intent. Kind of came out later that he signed a big NIL deal. There's been certainly some reports and discussions that was verging upon, I guess, $13 million, which was kind of, I guess, not just one upfront payment or anything.
That's over the value of the entire collegiate career, not just.
And as our good friend Troy Dannon, the AD at Tulane, remarked to us at the NCAA convention in a video we put up on Connect, a lot of those figures, they're all lies. So just take some of the numbers that necessarily with a bit of a grain of salt. But certainly over the course of the deal, if you hit certain targets, maybe you end up winning the Heisman. Who knows? Maybe you can have quite a hefty NIL deal from one of those Florida collectives, but. Essentially, it kind of came out that Florida promised a few things that maybe they shouldn't have, and they didn't kind of have the backing that they certainly did, and so eventually that got back to Rashada that he was not going to get what he was promised, and go back and forth, and eventually he's let out of his NLI, and he's kind of a bit of a free agent here before the second signing period, going into what is probably the test case in terms of here is what can go wrong in NIL, especially when two schools want to battle over a recruit. And you know what? Maybe it might turn into a bit of a booster. I'm trying to think what would be the appropriate word here for the audience that might be listening in the cars with kids.
Because the only manhood measuring
Yeah, sure.
contest, yeah,
That works. Yeah, that
sure.
does seem like that is certainly at play here, involving a few folks from Miami and Florida there.
Let me try to flesh this out with a couple of details because I have since we heard about this at the NCAA convention. I tried to talk to a couple of people involved in the legal community and involved in Florida recruiting and this kind of space. So for one, you are right. You should be very skeptical of very big numbers that are thrown around in recruiting. However, in this case, multiple people that I trust very much about this issue have said, actually, the $13 million number is accurate. And I think Edgar Thompson of the Orlando Sentinel even was like the first person to throw that out. It was, I think, a little bit more than 13, like 13.7 or something over a 4-year period, which, to be fair, is significantly more than any other reported deal, including for prospects that are higher regarded than this gentleman. The rumored numbers around his initial commitment to Miami, substantially smaller than this. And part of the reason, as best as I can tell, this is I want to use this is a very educated guess, because if I knew everything absolutely stone cold, I'd write it in extra points. And this is the kind of story that's it's hard to do that. That's way over market. And part of that, I am told, is because some of the individuals involved with Florida's NIL big budget worlds were motivated less by the quality of the athlete, and you're right, more about spiting one or two big money people at Miami, and also maybe the representation on all sides involved here was not the best legal or marketing representation money can buy. We've talked about this a lot in the NIL world. Sometimes agents are NFLPA certified and have years and years of experience for major firms and contract negotiations. Sometimes they're 22 or 19 or somebody in AAU basketball who's not an attorney. So there were some other individuals here. But yes, Florida, it would appear, wrote a check they couldn't cash. And this is significant for a couple of big reasons here. Number one, if you are involved with Florida's football program right now, you have got to be pissed.
Oh, they are. I can confirm that.
Right, and it's you're pissed not just because you lost a quarterback, but you're pissed because now it's in the paper, and this is now the market has been set. I'm making finger quotes here for what a high level quarterback is. So if you're going into try to find a 2024 guy that who's a high 4-star, 5-star guy, they're gonna ask for that kind of money, and they're gonna ask for why your people don't believe in me like they believed in Jaden, because they did offer him that much until they figured out they didn't have that much in the checking account, and furthermore, anybody else who's of a similar profile is going to ask for those numbers for those other schools. So even though that's not the real number for per year is probably closer to between 500 and 1.1 million for somebody who's not Arch. But that's going to be a gigantic headache for coaches everywhere, because that's an enormous amount of misinformation, and recruiting services and message boards and some less scrupulous agents are going to push that world a little bit more. That's a problem. You also now have the problem. It's going to be very easy to negative recruit against Florida because they wrote a check they couldn't cash. And not only that, how can I say this in a way that's not going to get me in trouble? The one dirty little secret about this industry right now is not everybody who is associated at the head of a major NIL collective is a very reputable business person. Is somebody that knows anything about compliance, that knows anything about sustainable development, They are the kinds of people that you might not otherwise want your athletes to be around, or at least do not trust very well, that have lots of reasons to be concerned about their long-term behavior. I think we can leave it at that without me getting in trouble. And so, if you're a parent or assistant coach you're recruiting against Florida, it's also like, if you knew there were some bad news dudes involved with some of these collectives, or that they're a joke or they're not organized, like, why are you promoting them as an athletic department? Why aren't you like publicly burning these guys immediately in every publication and every internal communication? What's going on with your department? Florida's not the only school, by the way, that's grappling with this question right now. This is also something my dear old alma mater is having to deal with, and I could think of a couple other programs where the behavior and the conduct and the qualifications of the head collective guy are an open question. And the school, you're wondering how to extract yourself from it. It's an issue because if your AD sucks, you can fire him. If your coach sucks, you can fire him. You can't fire the biggest booster. It's much harder because the school, kind of doesn't really have a relationship with these guys. So if the person running your group's bad news, the only entity that can oust them would be like a booster-led revolt. And we're not really good at doing that kind of thing right now. So I look at all of this as a bummer for everybody, because Rashada sure as hell isn't going to get $13 million from anybody. He's a very good quarterback. He's not, from the people I've talked to who like know ball, he's not seen as a generational prospect, and is not somebody that's likely to start from day one. He's going to have to gain 15, 20 pounds. He's 6'4". He's a lot thinner than I am. I mean, and that there's a weight room issue. But also with a guy that with a 9.7 recruiting profile, that person could be Caleb Williams, who won a Heisman Trophy, or he could be somebody who transfers to UNLV in a year and a half. Like, there's a huge range for high 4-star guys. Now he's got to go find a new school after the first signing period's mostly done. Most Power 5 schools have signed a quarterback. And the caliber of schools are looking at that now. It's a big step down from Florida. So maybe you try to make that up on that proverbial second contract. But like in the short term, it's easy to see how this didn't work out super well for him. It hurts Florida. It hurts anybody recruiting quarterbacks now in the marketplace. It's just, to me, I look at this whole thing as proof of there's a lot of things wrong with this system. And now nobody really benefited except for a couple of people that wanted to make Miami or Florida boosters look bad, with a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah, and the great irony too that Linda Teeler, who is one of the high-ranking officials there at Florida's athletic department, is the D1 Council chair, been heavily involved in terms of NIL legislation at the NCAA level, and then this all happens. I know Scott Strickland. I'm sure, I don't know if they put out a formal statement or not, but the folks at Florida, from the athletic department to the coaching staff, they're extremely not happy about this whole situation.
I know they're mad. Like
and really they all have a right to be very upset about everything that is going on, and I think this kind of speaks to kind of that, because that line is there in terms of both state law and in terms of the NCAA legislation right now. It's just it is difficult for these athletic departments to navigate this, because to your earlier point, they don't want to piss off the boosters. They really don't. Not only do they need their money for ticket revenue and those seat donations, and to keep them in the good graces of their department for revenue opportunities. They know that in terms of acquiring talent, especially in a very competitive SEC on this front, they're going to need their money, and they're going to need them to continue to invest in kind of Florida athletics through NIL and these opportunities. And that makes things difficult. And I think it underscores again that this is so silly that we continue to do this way. And maybe that is one of the great hopes, certainly, that maybe you can start to bring some of this in-house. Maybe this kind of reinforces that, a bit eye-opening for those that understand that, hey, a lot of these activities, a lot of these barriers that we're putting up, that they really should be run through the athletic department. A little more transparency, a lot more certainly taking things above board, and instead of wish tones and all that sort of stuff. Like you can actually talk about these things with kids, being very upfront in terms of their scholarship offers, in terms of what they're getting, in Alston payments. Here's your NIL package. Like a lot of this stuff I think would make for even the parents to be a lot more comfortable in terms of, all right, not only am I sending my son to go live with you and live on your campus and get an education from you, but hey, here's financially, here's what's going to be in it. And I know that because it's a, an institution that, their kind of word is their game, not some kind of shady collective that may or may not have some ties here or there or get promoted by the school. So it really speaks to kind of the wild west we still find ourselves in with NIL. And I think eventually things will settle down a little bit more. Everybody will kind of understand the lay of the land just a tad bit more. But stories like this, this is not the first time, certainly, and it won't be the last time. But I think it is a bit eye opening for a lot of administrators out there, for a lot of fellow collective administrators out there that are saying, all right, well, we cannot be caught in this type of situation, because not only is it bad for Florida in terms of their reputation, their brand moving forward, but I think it's kind of bad for a lot of people beyond the state, beyond Gainesville in particular, knowing that this could happen to them as well.
Especially if your donor groups or the people that are running this are not people that you extremely trust. Like, there are some of these that are run by ex-compliance people, ex-development people. I've had a couple of industry professionals suggest that maybe moving forward, if we're going to still have NIL collectives, if moving towards a professionalized model in some capacity doesn't kneecap most of these things, that in many cases it will make more sense for this either to be an arm of the booster club, which is often a quasi-university employee, or
Well, I mean,
something.
right up the road at Florida State, they used to have Seminole Boosters and the athletic department separate. They've kind of remerged now, but
Yeah.
if you kind of have a similar setup, but there's an NIL component to kind of the booster organization, that would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot
Yeah.
of sense to a lot of people, and I think we've heard some increased discussions about potentially if some of the NCAA or congressional legislation comes through, maybe there's the third party administrator concept comes back in some form or fashion. I know that's been was discussed a little bit among some of the conversations I had in San Antonio last week. So like there's a lot going on in this space. And I would imagine that the more that everybody thought that they wanted to be hands off initially, but once they saw what the free market was doing, they were like, hey, wait a minute. Maybe we need to change our approach just a little bit.
A little bit. And I think somebody in Indianapolis would probably say this kind of situation is exactly the sort of thing we're trying to limit, to prevent from happening, but we can't have the legislative, we don't have the administrative framework to do it without Congress.
Well, and keep in mind too that there were some recent changes in terms of the enforcement arm on the NIL front as well, and so I think that could end up coming into play not only with Florida but a number of schools. We've heard John Duncan, the VP of Enforcement, say that they do have cases in the pipeline. They are investigating a lot of stuff. Several NCAA enforcement staff have spent some time down in the state of Florida, not just focused on this deal certainly, but others, and so they're going to be NIL cases, and because of the changes, a lot of these athletic departments are going to be on the hook for this. Whether they had some any kind of inkling or had any kind of involvement at all, depending on their state laws, depending on things, they're still going to be on the hook for some of these potential violations. And I think that's important to keep in mind, is if things were promised in a pay for play situation, that more than anything is got to be the worrisome thing for those at Florida and beyond, because now you're talking about not just your reputation getting damaged amongst recruits and going forward. Now you're actually talking about, oh man, we might get some scholarships taken away. We might get some head coach responsibility violations where you're missing a game or two. Could impact assistants. So like there's a lot of coming out of not just this case, but I think other NIL cases over the next coming, say, 6 months or so that are going to be a bit eye-opening for a lot of folks around there, that you kind of got say, hey, maybe we need to change our tact just a little bit, because this sort of thing is not good for anybody, much less this program in particular.
No, the last thing anybody wants, except for a nosy, drama-fueled person like me, would be for litigation to occur between an athlete and a collective that goes into discovery. And the second that suddenly a whole bunch of emails and burner text messages and things have to go to a court, and we get our hands on those, that would be bad for a lot of people, especially if that sort of thing happened in the SEC, where maybe those conversations have a little bit more of an edge than they might in the Big Sky. So we'll see, right? Like I look at these are similar things here that I think have the capacity to shape what happens this offseason in a meaningful way. Is this the wake up call to change how money is being distributed or accounted for other major organizations? Is this a wake up call for other state houses, a wake up call for what happens within the federal government? It probably should be, but we can't exactly predict the future. Like what I can tell you is that I'm going to be calling as many lawmakers as I can If you are a lawmaker and you're listening to this show, my email is compliance@extrapointsmb.com. You never know. There are a couple of state lawmakers that read Extra Points, so maybe. But I will be bugging you, and I will be continuing to bug people in the NIL collective world to learn about how some of these operational changes are happening. We got a bunch of other stuff at Collegiate Sports Connect that you may have missed. Cannot recommend you sign up for this enough, not just because that helps ensure that Brian and I have jobs. So much of the video content that we produced over the convention, a ton of content, and I'm trying to get some more of this into Extra Points this week. You can find it there. Interviews with a ton of athletic directors, with Linda Livingstone, with the head of NCAA compliance, with the head of the medical arm of the NCAA. You can find all of that there for free. CollegiateSportsConnect.com. And of course, this show at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You enjoy it, give it a Georgia recruiting class ranking, 5 stars. To demonstrate to our bosses and also to the algorithm at large that this is a show worth spending some time with. Did I get everything, Brian?
Yeah, I think so. And just reaffirming that, signing up for Collegiate Sports Connect, not only a great place in terms of listening to all of our great content. We'll have interviews with all the vice presidents at D1, D2, D3 as well up this week. And so a lot of NCAA convention coverage, a lot of state of the industry type of conversations with key ADs, a lot of commissioners as well that we caught up with there in San Antonio. But great thing if you want to tell, maybe somebody that is coming out of college and wanting to get into the sports world. It's a great way to find a lot of jobs, be able to get searched and find those entry level positions as well as much more senior level positions. So not only a great tool in terms of kind of career development and keeping up with the latest, but it can also help you in terms of your actual job. So be sure to sign up for Collegiate Sports Connect, and it's all free, just like this podcast.
It's all free, and just like most of Extra Points, which you can find at extrapointsmb.com. I would prefer it if you paid for the whole thing, because that pays for a lot of this stuff. You just bought new headphones, that sweet Extra Points money. Be sure to subscribe there too. We will be in touch with some more over the coming couple of days on all of those platforms. Thanks for listening. Don't get in any trouble, and we'll be in touch with you all soon.